Chapter 21. Robbing a Bank. Unknown to them, their goddess actually stopped midway to take one more look at them. Althea watched the twins from the corner of her eyes as they entered the building, her heart a bit heavy. She hoped that this time, her intuition was wrong and the boys would find their relative alive and well. Speaking of relatives, all survivors she encountered so far also seemed to have a relative that survived. Then again, thinking about it made sense. Whatever it was that transformed the creatures of Terran, it transformed them on the genetic level. It was indeed likely for one survivor to have one or two relatives that also survived. This was also mercy in its own way. Those who lived would have had hope of reuniting, while those who died perished together with their loved ones. Sigh. Too bad she didn't know who her blood relatives were. She arrived in front of the target building 10 minutes later, without another hair out of place. At level 3, armed with a plasma gun and accompanied by a beast dog, she could basically walk sideways in a zombie-infested city now. After so long, her spirit was still high. This was something she didn't expect at all. She almost kissed the plasma gun and raised it to the sky to honor it. She didn't forget to give another jerky to Fufy, of course. "Silly dog," she said, smiling when Fufy smiled at her, asking for more treats. She didn't though, as it was a finite resource and she shouldn't be treating them as treats in the first place. She turned her attention back to the 40-floor-tall building in front of her. The whole building was owned by this bank, and her husband once told her this building had one of the deepest and most well-guarded basements in the city. The ground floor had a high ceiling covered with the latest improved tempered glass. She didn't try to force it open either. Not only would there be noise if the glass broke, though she read somewhere this type of glass wouldn't even budge with grenades, but would also trigger the alarm of the building. She was not afraid of the zombie wave, but it was too troublesome and may take her forever to finish them. She also didn't have the skills to hack into the system and let the door open itself for her. Had she known she would rob a bank someday, she'd have forced her husband to teach her the related tech. As she mused, she couldn't help but look at the timer in the corner of her eyes. 06:34:33. She didn't dare think she had too much time. Should she just go to the hospital first? No, it was too far away. It was best to finish her tasks in this area before going to the hospital. She left the motorcycle in an alley nearby and took Fufy to the back door. It was made of special metal, firmly attached to the walls with special systems. She looked around her surroundings and found a crashed car not far away. She forcefully took a loose surface and brought it with her as a shield. Yes, she was inspired by the bulkier twin. Anyway, at level 3, she could now effortlessly carry weights she wouldn't even be able to lift before. Standing in front of the door again, she wondered if she could sell things firmly attached to a heavy surface. With that thought, she raised her hand and let her palm touch the cold metal surface, willing it to be sold to the system. 0.7T of non-ether grade B metal alloy detected. Would you like to sell? Yes, no. The moment she clicked yes, a blaring alarm sounded throughout the building, attracting the zombies in droves. She quickly entered the door and used the metal shield to cover it. She pulled whatever desk was nearby to fix it in place. However, she knew it wouldn't hold a horde, so she ran deeper into the room to get heavier objects to stabilize it, with Fufy killing zombies attracted by the noise along the way. She groaned as she pushed the large metallic desk with all her strength, and she felt lucky she didn't push hard enough to give birth then and there. Bang, bangs, bang. The horde lunged towards the barrier using their bodies, banging continuously as they hit it, over and over. She held her weapon high as she stood a few meters away, with Fufy guarding next to her. The metallic thuds continued, but they soon became muffled as more zombies piled up to the point they could no longer move. Thud, thud, thud. Seeing that the metal sheet had indeed managed to keep the zombies at bay, Althea let out a sigh of relief. As for the other areas, she wasn't particularly concerned. Even with this alarm, the zombies would just lurk around the building crazily. Walls and glass that could withstand grenades shouldn't be afraid of zombies attacking it. Of course, the zombies inside weren't very few either. Fortunately, there were not that many, because the office hours had already finished hours prior to the disaster. It was just that a lot of back-of-the-house employees were working overtime. However, the level 3 Althea with her plasma gun and dog sidekick was like a tsunami passing by cottages, dominating the floor within a few minutes. +5 experience, +5 copper. +5 experience, +5 copper. +5 experience, +5 copper. +10 experience, +10 copper. +5 experience, +5 copper. +10 experience, +10 copper. +10 experience, +10 copper. It felt very good to be unstoppable, and honestly, she was getting a bit greedy. Hey, she now knew that she had the potential to be power-hungry. It was just so sad that she couldn't take the plasma gun with her. She took over the ground floor and only found computers and cash. She was not disappointed, though, as she was already expecting this. She looked around and saw the zombie with the best uniform and took her access card. Althea then searched for the elevator to the basement and confirmed the access card could be used on all the floors. She decided to go from the top basement floor to the bottom. In the unlikely case that the electricity would be cut off, it would be less laborious to go down the stairs than upwards. She took all the metals, jewelry, and safety deposit boxes she could find. Even the door of the massive safes couldn't escape her greedy claws. She was still amazed that she could do this at all. Later, she would find out this was only possible because she was already at level 3. Her mental capacity was enough to cover the connection between the heavy objects and the fixed surfaces. At that time, she couldn't help but praise the skis for her luck. 0, 5, 14, 23. Althea symbolically patted her pocket in satisfaction. Wealth, 9,697 gold and 72,267 silver, 10,233 copper. She didn't know what this could purchase in that other world, but it didn't stop her from feeling like a little rich woman again. Chapter 22, Malicious Men. 04, 43, 23. Althea looked at the pharmacy cabinets filled with medicine, and for a moment was very tempted to take as much as the space allowed. After all, who did not get sick? However, she did not do so in the end, all because of an inkling that these medicines would not have much effect on their improved bodies. Of course, it was still a pity not to take anything while she was here. She cleared out a little box the size of a lunchbox, took some basic medicine, a bit of everything else, and filled it to the brim. She then went to the herb shop in an alley not far away. This time, she took all the seeds and the processed herbs with her. Although she didn't know if the end products would have an effect on their bodies, nor if the herbs planted would even grow in that other world, this was her specialty after all. She, at least, had to try her best. Looking inside her space backpack, she saw that it only had a few centimeters of space left for emergencies. She finally decided to put an end to her limited hoarding session, and she looked around to call Fufy, only to see him munching on chocolate left on the ground. "Don't eat that," she said, patting the Fufy's fluffy head and opening his mouth. Wasn't chocolate poisonous to dogs? She looked at the stupid dog's smiling face in worry. "You're not going to die, are you?" "Woof. Delicious." She quickly looked at the dog's status. Pet stats. Name, Fufy. Age, 2. Level, 1, 505-2000. Life, 310-400. Spirit, 320-400. Physical, 31. Agility, 26. Defense, 14. Mana, 100. Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, Earth. Titles, none. Overall rank. Her furrowed eyebrows loosened after seeing there was no negative state, but she checked on the dog again if he felt anything odd. But she saw that there was really no problem, and she finally sighed in relief. Their improved bodies were one of the few good things that came out of all this. After several minutes of delay, she and Fufi finally went back on the motorcycle to head to the hospital. The next few minutes were uneventful, and she traversed the car-filled roads with ease. In fact, if she wasn't pregnant, she'd have gone much faster. But suddenly, she felt a subtle change in the air. Something wheezed in her direction, and she quickly avoided it by making a drift. She cursed as she struggled to keep her balance, feeling the rubber of the tires screech against the asphalt road. She eventually regained control, her heart beating crazily, and she turned her head to look coldly at the source. "Heh, not bad," a slurring voice sounded. Someone even clapped his hand carelessly, and another shot the zombies attracted by the sound. It was 3 men with similar features: huge bodies, ugly beards, unsightly faces, and disgusting grins. They arrogantly approached her with guns pointed menacingly in her direction. Like her, they were also covered in zombie goo. "Oh my beautiful lady." They all stared at her openly, lewdness seeping through their gaze, making evocative expressions that made her want to vomit more than zombie innards did. "Why are you running around all alone in this dangerous place?" The oldest one smirked, showing off his silver canines, but unlike the other 2, his focus was something on her back. "You have a nice thing on your back there," he said, pointing at the huge plasma gun behind her. He obviously thought she would give it to him, without any questions. Althea scoffed and did not bother to give them a response. Instead, she pressed on the horns of the bike, attracting more zombies to them. Although they did not actively attack those who were covered in zombie goo, it was enough of a distraction. Seeing the men turn their attention to the zombies, Althea quickly stepped on the gas and went in the older one's direction. After all, a wise man once said, "Kill the general first." She turned her head to avoid a bullet, flexibly turning with the inertia. She pressed the plasma to the man's head. +50 experience. It took a moment for the other 2 to realize what had happened. It was only after they saw the man on the ground, bleeding from a hole in his head, that they managed to absorb it. They saw red. "Brother. Uncle. You bittchhhhhhh." The younger one screamed and waved his gun around, pointing at wherever she was at. Guns nowadays barely produced any sound at all, so it was not easy to avoid stray bullets. Fortunately, there was a huge amount of meat shields surrounding her and Fufi, keeping them from injury. Not to mention, the men were cursing her loudly, as if they wanted her and the zombies to pinpoint where they were. She pressed the gas to the max to get as far as possible, aiming the plasma gun at the 2 roaring men, expertly aiming her gun and exploding their heads moments later. +30 experience. +30 experience. She did not put down her gun, though, as the noise unfortunately attracted a dozen upgraded zombies, and she quickly shot continuously until the zombies nearby were wiped out, Fufi covering her rear for leaks. A city was a city, and the upgraded zombies attracted by these jerks were several times the total she'd encountered so far. After nearly half an hour of massacre, the zombies nearby were finally cleared. Panting, she looked down at the plasma gun, which had now lost its luster. Gone. She sighed regretfully and placed the now useless gun on a surface. She parted it with a very pitiful expression on her face. "You lived well, my friend." Even Fufi looked amusingly solemn. Althea held back a smile as she turned back to the bodies not far from her. She wanted to ignore the new zombies that wandered, but the blood of the men flowed, and it was about to attract them to eat the dead bodies. Killing the new zombies that drifted by with normal guns from her space, she went nearer the men's bodies to check for resources and found out the guns didn't have bullets anymore. She looked around, and there was no loot. It seemed that while killing other survivors provided a higher experience than zombies, it gave nothing else. The contents of their space disappeared, and neither were their monetary rewards. This may seem unfortunate at first, but this was actually a good thing. Otherwise, survivors would end up killing each other before the real enemies did. Shrugging, she waved at Fufi, signaling that it was time for them to go. The dog followed her and jumped back on the motorcycle, and the duo continued to their destination. The hospital. Chapter 23, Hospital. 03-21-22. Althea looked at the hospital with a complicated expression. It seemed like it was only a few days ago that she was here, also for an ultrasound. At that time, both Auntie and her brother came with her. They admired the growth of the children together, gushing about how beautiful the kids were how they were growing so well. Now she didn't have either of those two people beside her, and the environment was no longer the bustling city she was used to. Instead, it was filled with the rotting scent of death and the gloom of despair. Althea took a step forward with a depressed mood. They walked closer and closer to the hospital, trying to be as quiet as they could. But it didn't take long before Fufi suddenly stopped midway, warily staring in a direction, growling. Her eyes followed the direction he was looking at, and she immediately held up her katana and took on a posture, ready to attack. Soon she saw fast-moving figures from afar, getting closer and closer. It was those upgraded zombies again. However, she didn't have a plasma gun anymore, and she was not planning on using the guns she saved for that other world. The upgraded zombies soon zoomed in on them, running quickly for their meal. But she noticed as a few ran in their direction, there were even more running behind them. Soon a small horde of fast-approaching figures appeared in her eyes. The noise they made also alerted the normal zombies, forming a small wave directed right at them. Her heart stopped a little. There seemed to be over a score. Why were there so many? What she didn't know was that many survivors in the area gathered together after the first few hours. They banded together, hopping to get through the ordeal together as countrymen. They did fairly well for themselves at first, even rescuing a few others. Unfortunately, they met the gangster trio and their guns, forcing themselves to be the leaders. But these men took advantage and harassed the women, igniting the rebellious spirit of the people. However, no matter how brave, the weak would be the weak. The fight unsurprisingly caused a lot of deaths, which in turn triggered the zombie wave. It was during this battle that the trio found out about the concealing effect of zombie goo, which was at the cost of 12 lives. Had she known, Althea would have stabbed their dead corpse even deader. In any case, those survivors were now upgraded zombies and were now her headache. She killed zombies after zombies, endlessly, while slowly approaching the hospital doors. Fufi really shined at this point, killing zombie after zombie, and quickly reached the peak of his level. She charged forward with a swift strike, her katana slicing through the air, beheading one. She then leaned down to avoid an attack, parrying her katana to a direction, stabbing another, and quickly slashing the weapon to take off its head. She turned her center of gravity to avoid a claw. However, it nicked a bit of her cloth on her stomach. It was too close to her bobbies that she felt her heart drop. In her distraction, Fufi leaped from behind her to paw another upgraded zombie's head. He wasn't strong enough to one-hit an upgraded zombie yet, but the impact was enough to push it back and give Althea enough time to gather herself. Althea quickly pulled herself together and sprinted towards the monsters, beheading them at the fastest speed, lest they attract even more zombies to the vicinity. By the time they cleared the zombies, her spirit was already halved, and she started to feel pregnancy symptoms. Dizziness, leg cramps, which could literally kill her at this time. Even if there were only ordinary zombies moving slowly, because of their quantity and her current state, she couldn't help but feel the impending sense of doom. The duo dragged their legs to the hospital and closed the door, attracting the ordinary zombies inside. Althea didn't want to move anymore. Fortunately, Fufi wasn't pregnant, and his energy and low spirits didn't affect him much. The dog killed them all, eventually reaching level 2. Again, the zombies turned to them, turning Wilder and Fufi killed them easily. She felt this was an important point, but she was too lethargic to think about anything at the moment. 02-23-11. Althea and Fufi went to the elevator to climb to the Obgyn department on the 4th floor. She opened the door, and they ignored the ordinary zombies as they ignored them in turn. They eventually reached the department and opened the nearest door. She didn't even say anything, and Fufi ran past her to deal with the two zombies in the room, one of which was in a doctor's coat, and the other was a woman with a big belly. To her surprise, not only did Fufi crush the heads of the two zombies, but also the woman's stomach. She belatedly realized that the child could very well be a zombie as well. The thought of a small zombie with a baby's face crawling made her spinal cord crawl. She praised Fufi sincerely and gave him a snack and a big petting. However, she really couldn't stay up for too long and eyed the nearest soft surface that she could see. She crawled on the hospital bed, which still had some blood on it, and laid down. Her eyelids were heavy, and her body felt like lead. It didn't take long for her to fall into slumber, with Fufi pattering next to her, guarding her with his life. Chapter 24, Ultrasound. 02-05-17. Stats. Name, Althea Witt. Age, 25. Level, 3, 925-5000. Life, 330-500. Spirit, 270-500, -5%. Physical, 80-5%. Agility, 77, -20%. Defense, 64. Mana, 300. Physical potential, B. Mental potential. Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, wood, water, earth. Titles, none. Overall rank, S. Current status, gestating, 2 life forms, weakened state. She swore never to let her spirit get lower so much ever again. Althea opened her eyes after 15 minutes of rest before turning her head to the machine beside her. It was just that she was too late to realize that was full of blood and heavily damaged. She took out her katana to check out the next room. They dealt with all the zombies in the hallway that approached them, and they soon reached the other ultrasound room. However, before they entered, the door of the adjacent storage room tentatively opened, creaking up to a small angle, just enough to see a round eye looking out warily. Althea's eyebrows rose, meeting the gaze directly. When the owner of the eye realized they weren't zombies, she visibly brightened and opened the door. But she seemed to realize something and immediately closed it again. A moment later, the door opened again a little, revealing a cute head of a girl with a shoulder-length haircut, who then looked side to side at both ends of the hallway, checking if there were monsters around. When she saw that every enemy was dealt with, she turned her head to the girl standing alone in the hallway and opened the door completely. The girl was wearing a nurse uniform and looked at her like she was Buddha. I need to check my children's ultrasound. Can you help me? The girl looked like she was in a daze, as if wondering if Althea was talking to her. She looked flattered when she finally realized. Why, yes, of course, and she followed Althea to the ultrasound room. The nurse kept stealing glances at her as she opened the door. Althea's eyebrows rose. What is it? The girl looked a bit apprehensive before gathering her courage to ask. You killed all these zombies. She nodded, and the girl stared at her in amazement and also disbelief, as she inevitably looked at the abnormally big stomach. It was really big, bigger than the ones she'd seen. Then she saw a flash, and a head rolled down to her feet. She screamed at the top of her lungs. Althea quickly covered her mouth and dragged her inside. How did you survive for so long? She asked. Not to be rude, but it was really hard to imagine. The nurse blushed, and her head tilted down in shame. Could she say that she was locked in by a bullying fellow nurse? I'm sorry. Althea just sighed and sat down on the bed. They were wordless until the nurse had set up the machine and placed the gel on the transducer. Seeing the other girl nervous, Althea smiled and decided to lighten up the mood. My name is Althea, by the way. What's yours? The girl's big eyes blinked in surprise just before letting out a kind smile. To be honest, it reminded Althea of Nanny. Sheila. My name is Sheila. Okay, Sheila, can we see the children now? Sheila, now much more relaxed, placed the transducer on the bulge and she stared at the screen. Her expression was one of amazement. Twins! No wonder it's so big. Althea looked warmly at her children on the screen, floating around, looking so peaceful and small and cute. She was so incredibly looking forward to when she could hold them in her arms. This is already 8 months old, Sheila mumbled, tone mixed with admiration and admonishment. I can't believe you're massacring zombies at 8 months pregnant. Althea, though, flinched at her words. What? Sheila was startled. Why, yes. Althea's eyebrows furrowed in puzzlement. Are you sure? Why, yes. Althea stared her down, making her even more nervous. Soon, the brunette realized that the nurse was really not lying, and she could only rub her throbbing head. She then took out another ultrasound image and showed it to the other girl. Sheila stared at it blankly, not knowing what to say. Althea sighed and pointed at a text in the upper right corner. Look at the date. Sheila passively followed her instructions, and her eyes immediately widened at the sight. This. 2 reports, a few days apart, extremely different results. What's going on? Sheila then looked at the stomach a little warily, wondering if some weird creature would be born. But she shook her head in the end. She saw the ultrasound herself, and she should know what a human looks like. Probably. Maybe. Althea watched the changes in her expression with amusement. I reckon the force that messed up with people's genes strengthened the survivors. In the case of my children, they grew up faster. Sheila nodded cutely, while Fufy kept staring at the screen, wagging his tail excitedly. Friends, friends, friends. Althea smiled and patted his furry head. After a while, she stood up and walked out. Noticing that Sheila was staring, unsure what to do, Althea held her forehead with a sigh. Really a mystery why this girl chose a stressful job like nursing when she was such an airhead. Do you know anything about childbirth? Why, yes, I have assisted in natural and cesarean births before. Althea nodded and continued to walk, pausing her steps and giving the nurse a sideward glance. Aren't you coming with me? Me, she gasped, looking at Althea again to see if she just made a cruel joke. Can I? Don't want to. And no, I want to, she squeaked, hastening her pace to meet hers. Let's go get cleaned up, Althea said and paused, looking at the darkness outside the window. I want to greet the new world well. Chapter 25, Fight. Aberdeen City, 5 years prior. Under the cloudy skies amongst the urbanscape, 2 young men, one 25, one 18, were duking it out. It was Ansel and his nominal brother, Garen. For the past half an hour, the two had been sparring, though it was mostly Ansel trying to land a hit, albeit to no avail. At this point, the 18-year-old Ansel was extremely sweaty and uncomfortable, his fiery red hair sticking to his smooth skin. Suddenly, the dark-haired Garen grabbed the redhead's arm, throwing him over his shoulder, throwing him straight to the ground. Oof. Ansel groaned in pain, eyes squinting from the brightness of the white clouds. He struggled to get out of the dammed ground, handsome face covered with mud from the soil below and his sweat. He felt extremely uncomfortable. He tilted his head to glare at the other person, who was as stern as always, muscular arms crossed and looking down at him. Also, to Ansel's chagrin, very handsome. Garen Witt was extremely good-looking. He had ebony black hair described to be as black as the universe by his admirers. This, along with his cerulean eyes deep as the ocean, as well as his masculine and chiseled features, made countless women swoon. Not to mention, his well-toned body and imposing aura was the goal of all men. This same man was looking at him like a weakling. Although he didn't show anything on his indifferent face, Ansel couldn't help but feel that he was mocking him. Damn it. Stand up, be a man, he said, his masculine voice full of imposing aura. And it gritted on Ansel's ears. Althea will be heartbroken to see my bruises. He couldn't help but quip back, knowing it was a sore spot for the man. Sure enough, The stoic expression on the overly handsome man's face cracked a bit. His well-formed eyebrows furrowed and crossed his arms, looking badly at him. "She knows I do this for your own good," he uttered out, his low baritone voice making him look more mature. Mature? Lies, absolute lies. Ansel immediately opened his mouth to say something sarcastic, but the jerk beat him to it. "Ah, I see." He paused. "You wish to be saved by a little girl again." Jerk. He mocked him for his baby acts, but who didn't know he often purposely fascinated Althea with that handsome face of his? Tui. He could still remember this ice block acting, spoiled when he was with Althea. Barfs. The sight burned his eyes, literally. The anger injected adrenaline in his veins, and he immediately stood up ready to resume the fight. He sprinted towards the man who didn't even bother adopting a defensive stance, and a vein of annoyance grew in his head. Ansel immediately threw a jab at him, which was easily avoided. Immediately, Ansel turned his body to give him a side kick. Also easily avoided. Ansel continued attacking Garen, punch after punch, jab after jab, and then sent him occasional supposedly well-timed kicks. Not a single one connected. He couldn't even touch the fabric of his clothes. What made everything worse was that the guy wasn't breaking a sweat at all. The jerk still had the energy to send out the occasional critique with that deadpan voice of his. "Your center of balance is too shaky. This is what you get for not training your body well. You lose your cool too easily. Keep a clear head, and you'll be able to find openings." He paused, avoiding another one of his attacks. "If you're against normal enemies, that is. F*CKU. Language." He didn't even say it out loud. GRRR. In their scuffle, they got nearer and nearer to a wall. A flash of idea entered his mind, and he continued his usual attacks with imminent misses, but it didn't matter at all. If anything, his hits were more inspired and a little quicker than usual. One time his punch almost nicked the side of his shirt. Suddenly, Ansel darted to the wall, using it as a thrust, and he flew above Garen. He clenched his fist, aiming to hit the square jawline of the other man. Garen managed to block it with his arms, but Ansel felt elated regardless. Finally connected. It didn't do any damage, but it connected nevertheless. Progress was progress, no matter what. To his surprise, the man actually smiled a little, giving him an approving nod. "Very good," he said, and Ansel's eyes dilated a little. "You've improved." Ansel honestly felt happier than winning a contest. City Z, present. Ansel leaped up using the brick wall of the adjacent building, making use of his weight to behead the upgraded zombie with his new machete. With another breath, he sprinted to a direction, slashing another, before turning his body to finally behead the damned thing. "You're amazing," Tom said, holding his axe, and had just barely managed to deal with his own upgraded zombie opponent. He cleared his throat, embarrassed. "IER had a rough childhood," he said, continuously defending himself from the onslaught of zombies that came their way. They now had to leave his baby Barbara behind because there were too many cars on the road. Some were still leaking gasoline. The duo had no choice but to go forward on foot. It was not easy, but somehow they managed to get out of the mobs alive. However, as they dealt with zombie after zombie and got out of it alive and well, he couldn't help but look back at Garen's upbringing. Although he felt extremely tired and dirty, it was inevitable to feel a little melancholic at the suffering he went through under that man's fists. Because the number of times, the knowledge he learned, saved his life was uncountable. He still felt a little thankful to that jerk, after all. Chapter 26, More Survivors. City Z. In a deserted street filled with abandoned cars and debris, a pair of acquaintances fought their way through the city. It was not easy navigating through the darkness, barely lit with dim, damaged lamps and the depressing moon. But thankfully, their improved physiques managed to make it doable somehow. Ansel had been to this city many times for business trips. But the once thriving street now lay in ruins, consumed by the darkness that was the apocalypse. However, neither he nor Tom had the energy to mourn for humanity's losses, as they were too busy trying to avoid getting bitten. Ansel and Tom moved forward together, guarding each other's backs as they ran. Somewhere along the way, they found out that covering themselves with zombie innards could hide them from the monster's sense of smell. Only for regular zombies, though, because they discovered almost as soon as they celebrated their new discovery, a pair of upgraded zombies sprinted towards them. One could imagine the feeling of falling from hell, just as they stepped into heaven. Anyway, back to the present, the zombies let out eerie groans as they attacked them, also gathering the attention of the ordinary zombies. Ansel darted forward, slashing through the horde with his machete. His movements were both lethal and graceful, and the brute Tom couldn't help but admire him even in this situation. However, while they were making decent progress, exhaustion had long begun to creep in. Dirty sweat dripped down their skin, their breathing became labored, and their movements became slower. Their spirits were already a third down. "Watch out!" Ansel yelled, kicking a nearby bin under his feet to an upgraded zombie about to attack Tom. "Thanks," the older man uttered, and took advantage of the zombie's distraction due to the noise the bin made. Afterward, he ran to stand closer to Ansel, guarding his back again. As they fought, they actively ran to their destination. While they should be looking to rest now, there were only less than 2 hours left, and they had to get closer to their loved ones as soon as they could. The two sprinted and ran over the crashed cars. It was really a challenge to jump from one car to another, especially since they were different heights and different textures. Some cars even had their front glasses destroyed. There were also some that were turned to the side. Ah! Tom had a misstep, and his leg fell on one of the openings on an upturned car without a whole side door. Fortunately, Ansel managed to hold his arm and he didn't completely lose balance. The redhead managed to get him moving, and they jumped to the next car, barely avoiding the claw that came to them. Their change of elevation was sudden, but he somehow managed to keep himself and Tom on his feet. Ansel was very proud of his balanced center. The damn training regime popped to mind again. Damn it, he did not miss Garen. He frowned, annoyed, and whipped his head at Tom, venting at the poor guy. "What are you doing starring? Let's go." Tom, who had been waiting for him to move. In any case, the duo continued to run and go over cars, and they soon realized that the zombies became fewer and fewer. As they ran, they turned their heads to look and saw that the obstacle that hindered them worked even better with the zombies. They watched as the zombie fell down the broken car by itself, head first, unable to move further. For creatures that are said to eat brains, they sure are stupid. Ansel looked at the zombies, with various parts bitten off. You don't see them choosing which body parts to eat, right? Maybe this one eats more poop. Tom cackled, remembering plenty of upgraded zombies whose stomachs were open and had their innards following them around. It was absolutely disgusting. However, their path seemed to become a landmine of sorts for the zombies. For ordinary zombies, they were blocked outright, while upgraded zombies could jump and skip, but not avoid the traps. Eventually, they did manage to escape, finding a small building to lock themselves in for a short breather and snack. There were about a dozen zombies inside that turned their heads simultaneously to the newcomers. Sighing, the duo quickly took care of all the zombies. Fortunately, they were all ordinary zombies, so they were dealt with little effort. It was a convenience store, and they also took away what they could, filling up the remaining free area in their respective spaces. There was no way. Their spirits were getting way too low. What they didn't expect to hear was the soft thump near them. They turned to see it came from the door of the freezer. The two men blinked and looked at each other, slowly approaching the door. After all, zombies couldn't turn knobs. This meant one thing: there could be survivors here. This made their hearts rise, but in a good way. A few steps in, and the twisting of metal sounded. The metallic door fully opened the next moment, revealing a small group of 5 people, shivering from the cold. The group of 5 was really diverse. The one who opened was a relatively aged man. Closely following behind him was a middle-aged man with a balding head, a pretty girl in her 20s, a horizontally blessed woman, and a dark-skinned man around his 30s. Tom and Ansel's eyes widened, and they looked at each other. Really survivors. Since meeting, they hadn't met other people at all. It was getting very depressing. Finally, there were others, and there were still 5 of them. Chapter 27, The Train Home. The group looked around, eyes hopeful, and searched whether the zombies had indeed been taken care of. Once confirmed, they almost cried in relief. They also saw that the 2 men handled so many zombies with completed limbs, and hope filled them. Especially the girl, who had been hopeless and found capable men nearby. How could she not jump at him? Especially how handsome the red-haired man was. "Thank you for coming here for us," she mumbled, blinking her eyes cutely. And she was indeed a bit good-looking, despite her chapped lips and ruined makeup. "We literally just passed by," Ansel said bluntly. "We didn't even know anyone else was alive." How Ansel scored so many women with his bluntness was a mystery to many men. Was doing anything with a good face considered handsome? The others weren't so cool, however, and they immediately approached the 2 of them when they realized they were somewhat amicable. "Heroes, please help us," the middle-aged woman said, and she was followed by the dark-skinned man. "Please take me to City A. I will pay you whatever." Afraid that the 2 men would take his offer, the middle-aged man immediately made a counterbid. "We need to go to City S, please. It's on the way." The old man was the only one who stood still, observing, but without hope in his eyes. Ansel and Tom looked at each other with complicated expressions. "We have our own families to go to, sorry." The other survivors frowned, but they refused to give up. Not reconciled, the pretty girl shifted targets instead. The girl even held Tom's arm, knowing he had the softer heart of the 2 based on his very guilty expression. "Mine is so close, please." Tom looked very conflicted, and Ansel patted his shoulder. They couldn't stay here. They didn't have the time or energy to help others. "Let's go," he said, gesturing at the door. The duo then went to the door, followed by a few. Of course, not before taking some food from the convenience store to their spaces, as they consumed most inside the freezer. Ansel didn't mind being followed. He was still human, but he needed them to manage their expectations. "You can come with us to where we are heading, but we won't get out of our way to protect you." This naturally stopped a lot of them from following to the door. Instead, some even looked at them indignantly. "How could you leave us like this?" the middle-aged man yelled. Ansel rolled his eyes. "It's not our duty to save you," he said. "You can only depend on yourself in this world." He then pulled Tom, and they went out together, not caring whether they were followed or not. Fortunately, none did. What they didn't expect was that, as they left, the jerks inside threw some canned goods in their direction, making noise. As if choreographed, the zombies turned their heads simultaneously in their direction. This made their hearts drop. "Damn it," Ansel and Tom cursed, gesturing to dart ahead. Those jerks. But what else could they do? They could only curse and head to their target destinations regardless. Half an hour later. After some time of struggle, the duo eventually managed to reach their planned intersection in the middle of the city. It was called Rosewood Intersection. This was the intersection separating the path walk to Moxie Town and the train station. The 2 men looked at each other, feeling a little melancholic. Although it had only been a few hours, the 2 still felt a bit sad at their separation. They found a relatively hidden place to chat and say their goodbyes. "Well, goodbye. It was good to meet you," Tom said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "I hope you survive," Ansel said as he took it. Tom let out a light laugh. "Likewise." And so, Tom turned around, though not before giving him another look and a nostalgic nod, and went on his way. Ansel then heaved a sigh, pulling his eyes away from his new friend and heading to a very different direction towards the train station. Now alone, he was extra careful in getting the attention of the upgraded zombies. Fortunately, the concourse was mostly clear and had few things to hit. 01, 45, 34. He eventually found the northbound train, heading to Aberdeen City. His goo-covered shoulders slumped in relief to see the train was working. Except for hundreds of normal zombies walking about, everything seemed to be in place. Even the train seemed to be following the set schedule. While waiting for his train to come, which was set to arrive in 5 minutes, 2 upgraded zombies managed to find him. With his level, though, he could deal with them by himself. After killing the damn things, he climbed up the vending machine nearest the train tracks. 5 minutes felt like forever to arrive, and when it did, he immediately threw a can just outside the door to attract the zombies inside the train outside. He watched as they swarmed out of the car, and he jumped above surfaces, getting closer and closer to the open door. Roar! He flinched but did not halt, darting to the open door. He entered the AI-operated train with a quick beating heart. Bump! The door closed, and the hand of the closest advanced zombie that went after him was stuck at the door, twitching creepily as it tried to reach him. The train surged forward with a gentle lurch a moment later. This was followed by a squelching sound, and the twitching hand dropped down to the floor, no longer moving. Ugh. Ansel couldn't move for a while, still waiting for his wildly beating heart to calm. But as he felt the train move under him at a constant pace, his whole body started to relax a bit, and he entered a state of temporary peace. He dragged his body to a nearby seat, using a rail to support himself as he flopped down the vinyl-covered seat. His head turned and watched outside the window as it moved. Dimly lit tunnels flashed by in a blur of darkness. The occasional flickering lights lining the walls of the tunnel illuminated the dark outside, reminding him of the light that still existed. He closed his eyes and heaved a sigh, resting the back of his head against the window. He knew that he had done all that he could. Even if he didn't make it, it was fine. He just needed to be as close as possible. Chapter 28, Final Hour. 0139, 02. In sharp contrast to, well, everybody else, Althea and her group settled down in the nearest luxury hotel. It took them quite a fight with a few more upgraded zombies, but they got out of it unharmed. Althea also used this time to train both Fufi and Sheila, so except for the most troublesome upgraded zombies, all the others were dealt with by the two. At first, the nurse was very scared. She also didn't have very good body coordination either, so she missed too many shots and got almost bitten too many times. So even when she was covered with goo, it was still not easy for her to deal with normal zombies, let alone fight an upgraded one. However, hearing Althea's voice beside her let her gather some courage to take that brave step. Sheila did not realize her timid personality was slowly undergoing a subtle change. And the further they stepped closer to the hotel, the more stable this change became. The hotel was called Niana Hotel, a 5-star hotel very popular in the city. It was a very expensive and luxurious building, and it gave prestige to those who used it. It was the type that was fully booked until at least a week later. They chose this place not only because of the estimated quality of the products, but also due to its exclusivity. There should be a lot fewer zombies inside than others. Sure enough, when they entered, they realized they had a much easier time inside the hotel. After dealing with the zombies, they decided to go to the hotel's back of house and fill up the remaining spaces and the hand-carry bags they had. They went to the housekeeping and laundry facilities and took cleaning equipment, sewing kits, linens, duvets, and towers. Of course, they also gathered more hygiene products, mostly for Sheila, some stocks and the bags, though, because Althea had her favorite brand, her own Wit Beauty, packed in her own space. They also went to the storage and receiving rooms where food and beverages were stored. Luxury hotels often stockpile non-perishable food items in their storage areas. They managed to find a mountain of canned goods, dried food, snacks, bottled water, and others. They chose the ones they liked most due to their limited space. They took a set of hybrid-powered radio equipment used by the staff as well, just in case. There were also first aid kits and medical supplies. However, their space was limited, so they could only get a bit of bandages, antiseptics, and basic medications. Besides, Sheila also agreed that these things may no longer work well for their changed bodies. After this round, the girls finally filled up all the empty space they had on hand. The two girls and a dog went to the elevator after taking a card from the reception desk, choosing the largest suite room on the penthouse floor, just because. Who knows what kind of place that other world was? They ought to enjoy these luxuries while they could. The suite welcomed guests with a shared, intricately designed living area and kitchenette. Overall, the shared space was no less than 100 square meters in area. There were doors to the two deluxe rooms with their own premium bathrooms and lounge. What's more, each room was complete with its own entertainment facilities, jacuzzi, and the like. Sheila couldn't help but feel emotional. She had dreamed of staying in this type of room after seeing an internet influencer brag about it, but she didn't think she'd experience it in this circumstance. Althea's thoughts, on the other hand, were going in a very different direction. Her eyes couldn't help but stay on the time counter floating in front of her. As they reached the final hour, she couldn't help but recall the number of those zombies and the number of survivors still alive. She knew the initial transformation had to do with genes and not too much on physical fitness. After all, she saw bodybuilding ordinary zombies, but the meek Sheila as a survivor. Still, she wondered how many really survived in the end. The planet had 16 billion people. Her city was small, but it still had at least 1 million population. How many people had she encountered so far? How were her family and friends? Did they survive the first wave? What about now? She shook her head, not thinking about it anymore. The final hour was for relaxation. They didn't know what would happen in that other world. They ought to get some proper rest. "Use that room and clean yourself up," she said, giving Sheila the duffel bag that had been in the motorcycle the whole time. It had 2 sets of clothing change for each gender as well as some other basic supplies. Not to mention, the hotel had its own supplies, so they were sure to be able to clean up well. Althea and Fufi went into one of the rooms. She cleaned Fufi up well first, then they showered together for a basic rinse, making sure that the disgusting goo had been washed off their bodies. Then, using the advanced hairdryer, she quickly fixed him up, happily pushing him out of the bathroom afterward for her own moment of respite. Fufi. Now alone and without a dog, Althea pampered herself well. She took a long bubble bath and scrubbed herself in every nook and cranny of her smelly body. Who knew when would be the next time she would get such rest? As she sighed in happiness, patting her stomach in relaxation, she finally took time to study her own status. Stats. Name, Althea Witt. Age, 25. Level, 3, 11255000. Life, 280,500. Spirit, 280,500, -5%. Physical, 80 -5%. Agility, 77 -20%. Defense, 64. Mana, 300. Physical potential, B. Mental potential. Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, wood, water, earth. Titles, none. Overall rank, S. Current status, gestating, 2 life forms, weakened state. Wealth, 9,711 gold and 79,267 silver, 14,233 copper. She didn't know these would all fare in that other world, but she had already done her best considering the time and resources she had access to. If it wasn't enough, she couldn't blame herself. Chapter 29, Migration. 7 months ago. We have unfortunate news for you, Mr. and Mrs. Witt, the white-uniformed officer said, with a somber expression. He was a pale-skinned man wearing a white uniform, making him look even paler. He and his partner, a middle-aged woman with copper skin, were standing still just within the threshold of their home. They did not come into the house, simply because there were too many houses they had to go to. The three of them happened to be in the house at that time, a rare occurrence considering their busy schedules. Nanny had even gone to the market to gather ingredients for a small feast. It was supposed to be an interesting and fun day, with the three of them having a rare time catching up with each other. Who would have thought? There have been 10:32 planes that went down early this morning at 06:34. He paused, heaving a deep sigh, trying not to show the exhaustion creeping in. There were no survivors. We are sorry to inform you that Mr. Howard Witt and Mrs. Alicia Murong-Witt have unfortunately passed away. In that instant, their living room, which had once been a place of warmth, suddenly got freezing cold. It was so cold that she was shaking, and her vision became blurry. If her husband's large hand hadn't been holding her, she might have fainted then and there. "What happened?" Althea heard the baritone voice of her husband ask beside her. She looked up to listen to their answer, trying to keep down the ringing in her ears. "We are still investigating the cause of this tragedy, and we request your utmost patience." Althea managed to find her voice to ask, "Where are they?" "Their bodies have been collected and moved to the South Montague morgue," the woman answered as gently as possible. Then she paused, not sure what tone to use in his next statement. "They are in relatively good condition due to their position in the plane." I see." The officers looked at each other and sighed, faces tired. There was no doubt they'd been through several houses before theirs. "We are sorry for your loss. The country had lost great scholars," the man told them very sincerely. "If there's anything we can do to assist you, please contact our team anytime," they finally said without further ado, handing over their business card. They then bowed and excused themselves, leaving the grieving family their much-needed space. They were probably heading to give the bad news to the next house that opted for personal visits from officials. The moment the door closed, Althea lost all her strength, her legs giving way, her entire body suddenly devoid of energy. "Althea," her husband's deep voice sounded in her ears, and she soon felt his strong arms support her weight. She habitually searched for his warmth, his pinewood scent, and buried her head in his wide shoulder. She felt herself being carried to the living room and to the comfort of the sofa. He gently placed her on his thigh, his warm, large hand patting her waist. It took a while to gather herself and get enough energy to utter a syllable, but Garen was patient and did not speak, only making sure she felt his presence next to her. "They're really gone?" she asked, voice cracking, tears lining up her eyes. It was so pitiful and broke Garen's heart. He simply embraced her deeper and patted her back. "They wouldn't want you to feel too sad," he said. "I'm sure they're watching over us right now, feeling very sorry for leaving all of a sudden. Do you want them to feel even worse?" Tears pooled in her eyes and she sniffed. Garen, always the boy's scout, took out a handkerchief and wiped her tears and then her snot. The gesture also reminded her of how her mother did the same, and she just hugged him tighter. However, as she buried her head and wiped snot all over her husband's shoulder, her peripheral vision caught a red-headed figure nearby. Her eyes stopped. It was Ansel, who was shaking in a corner, returning to his old ways of hiding and suffering quietly. But she was really sad right now. She couldn't stand up to comfort the boy who lost his biological parents at the same time. How could this happen?" she asked her husband, voice weak to the point of whispering. Thousands of planes went down at the same time. Most were still much worse than their parents. Should she be thankful they got their parents' bodies in one piece at least? "I will find out," Garen said, placing a comforting kiss on her cheek. "Leave it to me." She nodded and couldn't help but look worriedly at the corner. Garen followed her line of sight and sighed. The man gently placed his wife on the sofa, placing a light peck on her forehead, before striding down the particularly depressing corner. "Leave me alone," Ansel yelled without looking up, voice squeaking, snot dripping down. It was really pitiful. However, in contrast with his gentle handling of Althea, he was more straightforward with this brother of his. Out of nowhere, Garen grabbed Ansel's neck collar, lifting him to his knees. "What?" Without speaking, Garen pulled him up, dragging him to the yard, very likely to the training ground. It may look harsh, but Althea knew her husband intended on giving Ansel some tough love to help him go through the tragedy. If Ansel entered that lonely world of his again, it would be difficult to bring him back. In fact, Ansel's shift from being mildly autistic to his confident, extroverted self had less to do with her, but had a lot to do with her husband's training. It seemed that learning to defend himself injected confidence in their brother. Too much, if you asked her. Neither of them would have ever anticipated he'd turn into a playboy, but it was better than him being trapped in his own world like he was as a child before meeting the two of them. Thankfully, her husband always knew what to do, and she didn't have to worry about Ansel anymore. Althea watched the two men go outside the house, her mood slightly better, because it reminded her of what she still had. Yes, at the very least, they still had each other. What she didn't expect was that he would be sent on a confidential mission a week later. She looked at him in a daze as she sat next to him on the couch. His deep cerulean eyes also gazed at her, orbs filled with apology, his large calloused fingers gently rubbing her hands. Eventually, her eyes cleared and she looked at him with certainty. "Our parents' accidents had to do with your mission, right?" she said, looking straight at his deep cerulean eyes. "You know I can't tell you, love," he told her very gently. He legally couldn't say anything, even if he wanted to. "I'm sorry I had to leave at this time," he uttered, placing his big palms on the side of her face. She closed her eyes and felt her husband's warmth. She knew it would be a while until she could do so again, so she didn't make any issue at all. When she opened her eyes, her emerald eyes had a renewed light. "I understand," she said. "Please find out what happened." "Of course, my wife," he said, placing a chaste kiss on the side of her face before moving to her lips. Soon, he became a bit greedy, trying to maximize the few minutes of time they had left. He licked her luscious lips, and they easily granted him entry. Even after years, the electricity in their touches never faded, and the warmth the other provided only became more comforting, more integral, and more intuitive. His large hands moved from the side of her face to her curvaceous back, pulling her to him so he could feel as much of her as he could, given their current circumstance. He changed the angle of their kiss to gain more access, to express more of his reluctance, and she wrapped her delicate arms around his neck, responding with equal passion. His phone rang several times before he was willing to part with his soft wife. His azure eyes caught the silver viscous string that connected their lips, calling them back together, and he leaned down again. All his senses were trying to imprint his wife, trying to convey his love, and his ears pointedly ignoring the incessant calls. He breathed in his wife's scent, savored her taste, and felt her warmth. After some time, they slowly parted and he placed their foreheads together, incredibly reluctant. She was still mourning. How could he leave? Althea could see the worry in his eyes, and she didn't want him thinking so much when he was on a dangerous mission. "I'm very strong. What I want now is to find out what happened." "I will, don't worry," he said, baritone voice lower than usual, filled with reluctance. Althea gave him a comforting smile and gave him one last peck on the lips before gently nudging him out the door. "Be careful," she said, and he nodded, leaning down for one last, really little kiss. "Remember, even when we are apart, remember your husband will always be with you," he said, and he embraced her one last time before leaving. Not to be seen again. At least, not in Terran. Present. Opening her eyes, Althea stared at the ceiling for some time. Heaving a deep breath, she stood up and got dressed. She wrapped up the washed clothing and equipment that still had a bit of stench and used her new ones instead. Forgive her for being queasy. Even if they were now cleaned up, They were still covered with zombie goo the entire day. She just took a bath. How could she stomach wearing such a thing? Of course, she kept it in space to be a spare. Giving herself one last look before rest, she also took time to see her equipment. Equipment. Head, none. Ears, none. Body, leather jacket, cotton undergarments +2 defense. Synthetic vest +3 defense. Arms, arm brace +1 defense. Legs, leather pants +2 defense. Hands, none. Leather gloves +1 defense. Feet, leather boots +2 defense, +0 agility. She had already given her helmet to Sheila, who needed it more. It was too uncomfortable. Her pregnancy made her very queasy. Anyway, she looked at the time once more and determined she could still get a shut-eye. 00:26:12. She laid down on the soft bed, setting up a timer for a 20-minute power nap. Fortunately, she was indeed really tired, so she fell asleep as soon as her head met the pillow. She woke up from her alarm after a while, stretching her body and marveling at not only the physique of a level 3, but also at the effectiveness of a power nap. Her spirit had almost been filled up. 00:05:01. She met up with Sheila and Fufi in the living room, settling comfortably on the largest sofa. Sheila couldn't help but stare at her, wide eyes and slightly flushed face. Althea stared back in puzzlement. What is it? Sheila gulped, still amazed at how pretty the other was when not covered in zombie goo. You're very beautiful. Your husband is a lucky man. Althea blinked, not expecting it, and laughed. Well, thank you. And yes, he is wherever he is. You are also very cute and charming. How old are you anyway? Sheila literally looked like an adorable minor now that she was all cleaned up. I am 27 now. Althea coughed a little in surprise. Well, you look much younger. Looking at her now, Althea couldn't help but recall the questions that had been running in her head. I'm curious, why did you want to become a nurse? Not to be rude or anything. No, it's fine, Sheila said with a smile. I was actually asked by my parents to do so they have a proper caretaker when they get old. Althea's beautiful eyebrows rose. Then what do you want to do? Sheila stared at her unsure, feeling ashamed. I don't know, she mumbled. In fact, she really wasn't sure what path to pick, so she just went with the flow and followed her parents' wishes without question. Althea scooted over and patted her head to comfort her like a child. Who told her to look so young? Well, this disaster can also be seen as a new beginning. She paused, emerald eyes looking out the window, to the sky filled with doom. Maybe you can find your calling, there. Sheila nodded, feeling hopeful. However, after several beats of silence, she couldn't help but give Althea a furtive glance. Althea raised an eyebrow. What is it? Your husband, if you don't mind me asking. Althea smiled and shook her head. He's a soldier. He went missing months ago. Oh, Sheila paled. Because Althea was so strong and beautiful, she unconsciously just assumed everything was good. I'm sorry. It's fine, she shrugged. He's still alive somewhere. I have an intuition that I'll meet him soon. She paused, looking out the window to the waning moon with a complex expression. My intuition has always been very strong. 00:00:32. Althea told them to hold as many important items as they could to see if they could be brought with them. Sheila held on to the duffel bag tightly, even taking a lot of the hotel's supplies with her. Another bag was placed on Fufi's back, but she added more meat snacks for him. In contrast, Althea freed her hands. Her hands would be holding on the two of them to see if they could be transferred together. 00:00:01. The air changed subtly, as if a force came down from the heavens. Then a circular pattern of light appeared on their feet, and Althea's expression turned a little dark, nervous. But she quickly shook her head off the thoughts, strengthening her will. It could be said that she had done her best to prepare, and there was no use being scared. At this thought, her emerald shined a sharper, more determined light. Whatever comes, come. Chapter 30. Welcome to the Xeno continent. Congratulations to the 114,876,877 Terranian who survived the migration. Welcome to the grand continent of Xeno. Protection period of 1 Xenoan month is activated. Althea stared at the new announcement blankly, feeling a bit shaken the moment her brain made the calculations. The number may seem a lot, but this was not even 1% of the almost 17 billion people who survived until the migration. This was a depressing number, 1 for every 100 people. What were the chances her friends and family survived? And what was the protection period? However, she could not even take the time for deeper thought, as all her stats appeared in front of her without her prompt, distracting her thoughts. Stats. Name, Althea Witt. Age, 25. Level, 3, 11255000. Life, 490,500. Spirit, 470,500, -5%. Physical, 80 -5%. Agility, 77 -20%. Defense, 64 +12. Mana, 300. Physical potential, B. Mental potential. Skills. Active, none. Passive, none. Elemental affinity, wood, water, earth. Titles, none. Overall rank, S. Current status, gestating, 2 life forms, weakened state. Wealth, 9,711 gold and 79,267 silver, 14,233 copper. Equipment. Head, none. Ears, none. Body, leather jacket, cotton undergarments +2 defense. Synthetic vest +3 defense. Arms, arm brace +1 defense. Legs, leather pants +2 defense. Hands, none. Leather gloves +1 defense. Feet, leather boots +2 defense, +0 agility. You have been assessed to have over 1,000 gold and overall potential above B. You are confirmed eligible to hold a Lord's Token. The Lord's Token. Enchanted magical accessory that grants its owner the right to establish ownership over a designated safe and optionally fortified location of his/her choice. Note, the Lord Token will be integrated with the Territory Lord upon activation. Would you like to take it? Yes, no. Her eyebrows rose, the distraction shaking away some of the depression and worry that plagued her. Lord Token. The key to a safe place. She chose yes, of course. Would you like to use it now? Yes, no. No. She still knew that one shouldn't build villages anywhere. Giving her surroundings a cursory glance, she judged that this was literally the middle of nowhere. Establishment of territory is put on hold. Please use the token within 7 days. However, before becoming too relieved, she had come to the question, why would a safe place be necessary in the first place? What is it? Sheila asked, pulling her back to the present. Sheila was not used to seeing the other woman look in a daze. Was there something odd in the stats that popped up? At this, she couldn't help but take a second look at her stats. Other than the so-called elemental affinity, the others were intuitive, and she found no major anomaly. On the other hand, Althea did not answer immediately. No one could receive her absolute unconditional trust except for her husband. Even her parents and brother, although she loved them very much, couldn't receive this, let alone a new friend. So at Sheila's question, she only shook her head in the end. It's nothing. Neither woman spoke for a while, absorbing the new place, feeling its difference. She smiled when she saw Fufy safe and sound and still smiling. Then, she looked at the new counter on the top right. 195, 59, 57. This must be the counter for the deadline of the Lord Token activation. Obviously, the unit of time here was a little different than in Terran. Making a quick calculation, she had a rough estimate to have an idea. So, a day here was 28 hours. Fortunately, the smaller units of measurement were the same, or else she would have been very confused. Of course, it could also be that the system simply converted it to units they could understand. Her emerald eyes couldn't help but stay on the new icon on her screen. It was an image of a palace and was dimly lit. It had a subtle feel of majesty to it, and she immediately knew that pressing it would probably activate the token. Speaking of the Lord token, she pondered more about the qualifications needed to receive it. Assuming B was the average potential, it would mean that almost everyone who managed to get over 1,000 gold coins before migration could get a Lord token. She wondered just how many territories would there be. And if people who got 1,000 gold could get the accessory, she really wondered if it was a good thing. She had taken out all the physical riches and safety deposit box items in her upper-class neighborhood and only got a little over 1,000 gold coins because she robbed a drug lord. And after robbing a bank, she managed to save over 9,000 gold coins during those 24 hours. How many people managed to get similar achievements? Considering the few survivors she met, she mused that most people would probably gather less than 10 gold simply because cash and digital money turned to waste. Except for the old generation, most people opted to place their wealth in banks and other digital wallets for convenience. So, what kind of people could get 1,000 gold coins within 24 hours? Gangsters, drug lords, ultra-rich people with dirty money. Normal people wouldn't think of robbing banks like she did. If most territories had leaders like that, she shivered just by thinking about it. Would those places still be considered a safe place? Then again, those who could get this amount could be considered capable, and this was a plus in its own way. Developing a territory in any world was a capital-intensive endeavor, and the powerful Lord token might just be wasted on others. She just sighed and put the matter aside for now. Anyway, that was the problem for other territories, not hers, at least not for a while. Whatever the case, she definitely wouldn't take the task of creating a territory lightly. Chances were, this new home would be her permanent one. This meant this would be the place her children would grow up in. She was determined to make it the best, at least for the children.